Welcome to God and Autobiography, the podcast. I'm Scott Langdon. On today's edition of Jerry and Abigail, an intimate dialogue, the two discuss Abigail's point of view about God's statement to Jerry, "Let Abigail love you." If that was a shock to Jerry, imagine what Abigail must have felt. How did she feel about that? In this intimate dialogue, Jerry asks Abigail that very question. Her response is both fascinating and illuminating. I hope you enjoy the episode.
Well, hello, sweetheart. Thanks for joining me in another intimate dialogue. You know, I was thinking recently about this experience I wrote about early in God and Autobiography, that at one point God said, "I want you to come into my heart," into the heart of God. And I didn't know what that meant, but I always just try to go along with these things. But I found it kind of scary because I thought, well, the heart of God, for one thing, it sounds like might be like the center of a hurricane or something, God kind of a powerful, awesome being. But also it sounded kind of like out-of-body travel. And I thought, that's kind of scary. What, you go out, where are you? And so I asked, I always try to go along. So I said, okay, I'll kind of make an effort at this and you just yield to whatever is going to happen. But I said, God, since I was kind of scared, be with me for this. Show your love to me for this. And God replied, let Abigail love you. You will feel my love through her. And I was reflecting on that, but that's kind of strange. And but I was thinking of what you often say, sweetheart, that seems apt in so many contexts. God can't mail a letter. I mean, there's a level of reality. God, however awesome and even pervasive, still things God can't do, like mail a letter. And though God loves us, and I think that since God is intensely personal, as I experience God, that love is not just an abstraction or motto or something. God is love, the way a business has a slogan, but God actually loves us. However, that's not a close-up, visceral love. It's not something you see in somebody's eyes or feel when they grab your hands, and we need each other. We need people for that.
Yeah.
And it's funny because it means there are a lot of reasons for loving each other, but it means there's a kind of extra reason. There's a kind of divine element in our loving each other. When you could count for love, human love, as an extension of social, we're social animals, as they say, where Aristotle says political animals living in a community, organized community, and therefore you account for social relations, friendship among gregarious beings like ourselves, and of course the procreation of the race, the basic biological reality. However, in my experience, sweetheart, love goes beyond sociability, likability, comradeship, and procreation, and that extra element. The only word I've ever able to think of it, besides divine, is sort of magical. There's something extra that just transcends these other things. Anyway, those were my reflections. Does that make sense to you, or how would you think about it? If God said this to you, what would you make of it?
So, and I'm expressing some wonderment or puzzlement that God, in dialogue with you, pointed to me as somehow the one who's got the knowledge or the know-how, and I'm
Yes.
sort of asking, well, what does that mean? What is that knowledge or know-how? And going through what it can't possibly mean in order to close in on what it might mean. And along the same lines, one thing it isn't is a phenomenon, because once I was, as I felt it, threatened in my way of life and all the um, supports for that way of life and the environs of it. Um, I felt threatened by the fact that I was in love, and that seemed to override a lot of stuff. And I was trying to get perspective on it. I tried Husserl's phenomenological reduction and tried to survey my feeling for you, sweetheart, as a phenomenon, and you know, sort of bracket the practical implications, which worried me, and just sort of look at it for what it was. But it didn't work. The phenomenological reduction, the one thing in my experience that it hasn't worked on is romantic love, because I couldn't get that distance um, on it that is the sine qua non for Husserl's um, inst- practice of regarding um appearances in experience as just that, without making value judgments or classifying them. Just look at it for what it is. I tried to look at my feeling for you as just that, just what it is, and found that it isn't a phenomenon like any other phenomenon. It was rather something like a huge magnetic force that pulled me into it. It couldn't be regarded as an appearance among appearances. And the wiseacres in Brooklyn College who said, you know, it's the coup de foudre, it's a romance. You enjoy it for 6 months, it'll wear off. You know, it's some kind of hormonal um, imbalance that creates the delusion that this is a perfect, wonderful thing. And then you wake up and it's over and you can't remember why you cared. Uh, that obviously didn't fit. So there are a lot of categories within modern life that my, uh, what shall I say, a pull toward you, my existential, my ontological pull in your direction, and the pull of my life in the direction of your life. Those categories didn't encompass that pull. On the contrary, they were pulled into the pull and disappeared in it while the pull kept going. Now, it could have been madness, you know, maybe I was just having a delusional attack, and I was quite aware and wouldn't have missed it, because all the yentas, all the wiseacres in Brooklyn College brought it to my attention that this could be a bad attack of a delusion. You know, that's how it was categorized by the clever people I knew. But, you know, there comes a point in life where you are at a frontier of your experience, and that frontier is risky. It's dangerous. It could be a delusion, because frontiers of one's common sense are famously prone to being delusional. But if it wasn't, and here I went through something like what you, darling, went through with the God voice. You know, it could be you said to yourself that I'm Looney Tunes. You know, that's happened to wiser heads than I own on my shoulders. But just in case it's God, just in case it's God. And I discount it. What in the world could replace that self-betrayal, that moment of challenge, of adventure, of stepping across the frontier of life? Nothing will come up to it if I walked away. So in the same vein, it wasn't, God didn't tap me on the head, but romance, true love, tapped me
What
all over the place. And I'm not a cynic. I'm not a modern type who doesn't credit stuff like that. I'm more pre-modern. I do credit it. I'm more, 19th century, Jane Austen or whatever. The Brontes, they know about this, but the moderns don't. They forgot about it. They outgrew it. So I'm not a modern. All the same, it did have, perhaps because the culture doesn't approve it anymore, and so you're really stepping at the frontier of what the culture would say is a smart thing to do. But it had, my feeling for you had overwhelming authority for me. And when something has overwhelming authority, you can't map it, because if you could, edge to edge, it wouldn't have that authority. It would be an object under your conceptual system instead of something that supervenes on it. So, yeah.
You made the analogy to my God encounter. And although I knew, just as you reported here, that this could be a delusion, what hearing of voices, so on, that's prima facie delusional. However, and I did due diligence. Okay, how do you check out such a thing? However, deep down, I never doubted the God voice. And the reason I always stated first, and it's remained true for me, the voice is so real, authoritative, and benign for real doubt. I could say I doubt it. I could hold it at arm's length and check it out in various ways. Nevertheless, when you encounter something that's real, authoritative, and benign, not dangerous, but good, then you go with it. And it sounds as if you were mentioning the way in which falling in love was authoritative. It filled the screen of authority. It sounds like wall-to-wall authoritative.
It raised, the feminists, in order not to fall prey to the ways in which women's romantic hopes have been abused by unfairness from husbands, from social constraints, from the abuses, tight corsets, petticoats. You can't vote. If you're too smart, the boys won't like you. All the ways in which the flowering of the human soul, if it's housed in a feminine body, a female body, has been crushed, even by masters of subtle thought, like William James with his poor sister Alice, who was treated as a nutcase and advised by the best medical opinion of the day not to read, not to think, because it would give her a bout of hysteria, when what was creating the hysteria, to my, post-feminist modern eye, was her effort to repress her intellectual powers. That was suicidal. She was killing herself. She was killing the mind in her body. And it was giving her these involuntary hysterical outbreaks. And James, wise as we now agree that he was too thick in the head as a, self-confident male in a sexually hierarchical society to think about what's going on with his own sister. So, I was well aware that to give up everything for romance has a very questionable history. And here I am, I'm living on the most desirable neighborhood and the most desirable city in the known world, in the Western world, the Upper East Side of New York, old rent. And I've got a great job that I fought for 7 years to regain after being fired for voting for the loser in a department election for chair. So, all the instruments agree, Abigail, don't do something stupid. And yet, so, it's almost a model case. Here's this liberated woman, enviably situated. I've been married and divorced, so nobody can say nobody wanted you. Better divorced, or it used to be widowed. That was considered, I think, in one of the James novels, widowed had the standing that divorced does today. You've been there, you did that, but you don't have to do it anymore. You can be yourself as you were before adolescence. You can be a real person. So here I am at the pinnacle of what anybody would want in the way of attainment on what's
and lifestyle. This is the ideal lifestyle. You were within walking distance of the great museums, art museums, the great cafes, drugstores that delivered.
Okay, I don't have, quote, personal happiness. Hey, this'll do instead of personal happiness. And I didn't fall in love with you for personal happiness. Love it wasn't about happiness. It wasn't he'll make me happy. He'll give me a fur coat. I didn't want a fur coat. I didn't want to be happy. I was fine. I'd done all that. And I didn't need to, break my fool head again. So I sometimes use the word ontological, that it could be a sort of a mystery word, a sort of a spooky word that doesn't conjure up anything, and therefore you think it's deep. But in case it's not just a pretend word, in case it refers to the moving, forming features of reality, I had known from the deaths of my parents and how they were at the end, they both, from each one, there emanated an authoritative love that seemed to confirm Dante's way of ending each of his contributions to his Divine Comedy, the love that moves the sun and the other stars. We can just bracket Ptolemaic physics and astronomy and just look at, no matter how the universe plays out and configures differently from how the Ptolemaic world looked to Dante, at the bottom of things is not just subatomic particles. at the bottom of things is love. Deeper than subatomic particles, more subatomic. Atomic. So there was our physics, our metaphysics, our epistemology, our psychology knows nothing of this. Knows meaningful relationships until they are meaningless. It doesn't know this ontological thing. But I'm not a stupid. I'm an educated woman, but that doesn't make me so stupid as our educated sense of things can make one. I could recognize something's going on here deeper than the deepest argument.
In light of all that, what do you make of God telling me, feel my love, God's love, through Abigail?
Yeah,
what's the role of God? You've told the story of romance.
Yeah.
It's ontological grounding, meaning it's grounded in the deepest levels of reality. That's just what that fancy word means.
Yeah.
And I'm told, feel God's love through Abigail, through the person with whom I am in love, and whom I love, and she loves me.
Well, one of my advantages is that I'm here. I ain't going nowhere. I mean, I did decide give up the Upper East Side apartment and give up New York, give up, everything, the divine, wonderful job at Brooklyn College, and let's you and me get on a magic carpet and fly off. So what I did contribute that God isn't quite. Not only God can't write a letter, he can't share your bed.
Yeah. We can't make a life together in the same way.
He doesn't have breakfast with you.
Hug and kiss.
Yeah. God being, omnipresent, whatever else God, the correct divine attributes might be, which I don't possess. One that I do possess is being here and now. I ain't perfect, but it's not about perfect.
Not about perfect.
It's about real. I'm real.
Yes.
God didn't give up anything that I know of anyway to love you. It belongs to the God nature. But I gave up.
You gave up the ideal life.
I gave up what every girl dreams of having. And a lot of people would say, you're crazy. So I also gave up my reputation for being smart.
Sane. For being sane.
Yeah.
There goes Abigail off the deep end.
Off the deep end. As I used to do as a baby, I would, not look at the fact that the table comes to an end, and I would see my mother, and I would walk off the table into her arms, I hope, and she managed to keep me from breaking every bone in my body. But, that I grew up. I stopped being a silly 3-year-old, and here I go again, walking off the table.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Well, it's
I think what God meant, unless I'm missing something more sophisticated, is that unlike God, I'm actually here.
yeah, yeah, and that's important. It's kind of funny,
Yeah,
you know.
I'm real.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
There are the places in God and Autobiography, in my dialogues with God, where I raise this question we all have: why why didn't God make the world more perfect instead of it's flawed in so many ways, so very many ways, so that it has enormous human suffering, animal suffering. That's just the beginning of a long list of problems it's got. And the answer is basically here, I'm not quoting God, but I'm just kind of restating it in different words, that God had to make a world that's real, that's real. And a real world is going to be material, the world where you can you stand on the floor, and if you step off the balcony, you fall and hurt yourself. That's a real world. And you could imagine, I don't know, and some ideal world where you didn't have material. Maybe we were all just free floating spirits, and God radiated love like a sublime light over us. But well, that doesn't seem very real either, does it? I mean, that's just a kind of science fiction or of some kind of fantasy. Uh, Whereas in real life, there are all the vulnerabilities, and you've described a lot of them in Falling in Love, the vulnerabilities. Uh, and that's part of it's being real. And the
yeah.
plus side, as you say, is we can share a bed together. We can kiss and hug. We can say, hello, I missed you this weekend when you were away. God never misses me, as far as I know. But it's nice to be missed when you're away, right? And you return, oh, good to see you. And that's real life, and you help each other in troubles. That's a lot of real life. Sometimes people apologize for, a good friend will apologize for sharing their troubles with me. And I say, oh, no, thank you. It's a blessing for someone to share their troubles with you. That
It's an
means you're
honor.
just living real life
Yeah.
in somewhat in partnership with them, sharing that friendship as a real friendship in real life, including its hardships, its ups and downs.
Yeah. I'm thinking I seemed to I gave the impression, I think, of faulting God for not doing what I can do for you. But as if, if God were a real, as omnipresent and omnipotent and so on, omnibenevolent, as they say, he could fill in for what Abigail can contribute to your life. But that ain't quite correct. Um, if God were something like, Jiminy Cricket and Pinocchio and Walt Disney, or, some kind of a good fairy who could always rush into the rescue every time you got in trouble. Uh, Athena often does that for Odysseus because she's got a thing for Odysseus. The goddess does it, sort of rescues him. Um, no, that would detract from life's real quality of being real. Uh, God isn't a safety net under every fall and every stumble and every precipitous um, bailout without a parachute. Uh, so I can do something for you, for your life, that God, simply being God, must not do, does not do, cannot do. That's not God's part in our story.
I'm reminded, it's not exactly an analogy to what you're saying and I'm saying, but of in the Garden of Eden, when I prayed about that scene, uh, God reports, after tasting of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, Adam and Eve realize suddenly they're naked, which means they've discovered sexuality, and they're off together. And the God I'm praying to talks about having felt left out. They now love each other more than they love God
Yeah.
for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
That they're there and present, and God becomes the third wheel. And well, that's not God's role. God's role is not covert in the Garden of Eden, though this very intensely personal God who talks to me, reenacted the scene in much that way, as if his personal side was sort of offended or felt rejected or put off. Well, God is kind of rejected as we seek all these other goods and rather neglect the divine element in our lives, the divine messages, the divine partnership, but the relationship of male to female, of person to person, in real flesh and real time, is powerful. And the kind of more spiritual relation one has to God really can't compete with it on its own terms. It can compete with it in some other category of kind of ultimacy or something. This, it's more sublime, maybe. I don't know what the right language would be, but it can't really compete with it in its own terms.
What you're saying puts me in mind of something that happened to the romantic erotic component of modernity in the course of the 20th to the 21st century. When I was coming of age in high school and college, very dominating of the youthful imagination were the sex scenes in D.H. Lawrence's Lady Chatterley's Lover and Hemingway's For Whom the Bell Tolls, where the earth moves as Pilar and what's his name get together. And sorry, not Pilar. She's this old wise woman who says that happens very rarely, the earth moving. But yes, I know all about the earth and the moving. Anyway, that for us growing American virginal girls at the High School of Music and Art in New York, where we were very intellectual and advanced at the ages of 15 and 16, whatever, that was the pinnacle of our youthful hopes. And I can't, not being a sociologist of the sexual imagination, I can't pinpoint what must have happened, but I know today, after feminism marched through the wastelands, and and that romantic hope, that erotic romantic hope, replaced the true love of an earlier pre-modern imagination, the true love of the Brontes and of Jane Austen, and I suppose even Dickens. All that was gone. The Victorian hopes were gone. The World War I had smashed them to smithereens. But what was left was an eroticization of a sexualization of the romantic hope that dominated, say, the first half of the 20th century through novels more than through essays and prose of other kinds. It somehow seeped into and permeated the culture, people gave up virginity the barriers to sexualization of their attractions, their usually youthful attractions. And the more they gave them up, the less they seemed to be romantic, and the more they looked like either healthful antidotes to repression, which, that ain't romance. Antidote to repression is just a medical thing. The more they got somewhat medicalized, and you apparently, from what I've seen, the young woman was told that she shouldn't be puritanic, she shouldn't be repressed, she shouldn't have age-old prohibitions against this natural, liberated, but it seemed less and less to be valued. The more it was advocated and practiced, the less interesting it seems to have become. So that we in the 21st century, the culture in the 21st century, doesn't seem to to include romantic aspirations. It's not that they've gone away, certainly not for young women, probably not for young men, but they're not culturally sanctioned. The feminists are busy overcoming barriers and widening their reach so that it's no longer just about heterosexual women, but about same-sex couples, and then no longer same-sex, but people who've been surgically altered. And then the question is that fair in sports competition? Is it fair if a sexually altered fellow is put in a woman's jail cell? At what point does that become actually abusive? And there are legal struggles about that. But none of this includes the romantic element, for which I, risked my worldly attainments and took deeply seriously. It now seems to have been scared out of the public arena altogether, and the competition between the traditional wives that somehow have organized themselves. I forget under what caption or heading or rubric, but back to traditional wife and mother and stay-home womanhood on the one hand, and on the other hand, this far-reaching feminism, which has expanded to such a degree that it can't protect real women in vulnerable situations like sports or prison. And none of it has to do with a woman qua woman. The feminist movement seems to have almost erased whatever is in a woman's actual interest, the usual kind of woman.
Given that there's so many kinds of relationship in modern life that are accepted and so on, many kinds of sexuality and ways of living that out, those modes out, why is the romantic important? What's lost if say casual sex, what sometimes people call recreational sex, replaces romance?
I think the sexual exquisiteness itself is lost, which may be nature's way of saying this ain't the way to do this. I think the sex itself gets somewhat rusty and corroded, so that's a little hint from the great mother capital N nature herself. And there is something like the point of life. Romance is, in a funny way, and I don't have any worked out theory. I'm sort of thinking aloud as we speak. But it seems to me that the heroes of 19th century fiction and the heroines of 19th century fiction, and that's the fiction where romance was taken as more global, more holistic, not just a kind of hyper erotic sensation feature. What seems to have been lost, what you might call the romance of life. You wanted, there's Sidney Carton on his way in the tumbrils, on his way to being guillotined because he has replaced the man who is the true love of the woman he cares for. So he's made the ultimate sacrifice for romance. And as he's lived an unworthy life, he's not a candidate. He never could have been a candidate for her hand, but he wants to be cherished and remembered in a noble style by her and her husband as long as they both shall live. And so he's on his way to the guillotine. And again and again in 19th century fiction, I can't think of as clear an example, but he seems to me to stand in for anyone, and I'm thinking particularly of the men who want to be noble, who want to act nobly in order to be worthy of the romantic style of admiration. When we met, you and I, you nobly came to the rescue of the college in which I taught, figuring out how to save the excellent curriculum, which was then endangered, which was why I called you. So your first connection with me was a noble one, and that is profoundly romantic. And somehow when God says Adam and Eve shouldn't just do it with each other, shouldn't just do this coupling and rolling around in post-Edenic enamored mutual obsession, what was really missing was not so much a third in bed, namely God, as the ennobling element in erotic life. Erotic life, even between animals, as we are now learning, courtship is a very stylized matter between peacocks, between stags and does. It is not a matter of scratching your hairy, chest and acting like what in the post-Nietzschean imagination is an animal. No, animals have good taste. Animals don't desecrate their erotic propensities, and we need to emulate animals and restore a sense of high purpose connected to desire.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good concluding thought, sweetheart, that the ennobling aspect of romantic love compared to, say, recreational sex and so on, which completely lacking. And I've seen these animal films. The female lion fights off the male lion half-heartedly, of course. She needs to be conquered in the end, but he has to be worthy of her. And that's a kind of high standard,
Yes.
and it's not worthy, just strong enough to take her. But these courting rituals are more ritualistic than that. It's got to go through many particular steps of courtship. You see this in various species. And, we're even higher level of development, presumably. And so our rituals are very high, and they're protective of that ennobling set of ideals that we engage in love, not just to gobble each other up in some, sating of appetites, but to actualize certain ideals between us, And you're not just Abigail. I mean, you are Abigail, but Abigail for me is the ideal woman. It's not just a person. Oh, isn't she cute? Or she seems to like me, so I'm going to like her. But there's a kind of ideal there, and you want to support that in your partner, support their noble aspirations and efforts.
We've got the wrong theories. The Freudian theory, all our, intellectualized explanations of motivation at this point in Western culture are not elevating and therefore not sufficiently true.
Yes. Well, thank you, sweetheart, for this lovely, intimate dialogue.
Thank you.
Love you.
Love you.
Thank you for listening to God and Autobiography, the podcast. Subscribe for free today wherever you listen to your podcasts and hear a new episode every week. You can hear the complete dramatic adaptation of God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher by Jerry L. Martin by beginning with episode 1 of our podcast and listening through its conclusion with episode 44. You can read the original true story in the book from which this podcast is adapted, God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher, available now at Amazon.com and always at godandautobiography.com. Pick up your own copy today. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, please email us at questions@godandautobiography.com and experience the world from God's perspective, as it was told to a philosopher. This is Scott Langdon. I'll see you next time.